Okay, we are live.
All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning we are looking at some changes to our 3-acre stormwater committee bill. Our legislative council.
Good morning, this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. As you just stated, there should be in front of you draft request 25-0967, draft 4.3, March 13th date and a 442 timestamp. Would you like me to just go over the changes?
Yes, for now we'll go over the changes and then we'll have any further discussion from committee members.
Well, you can go to page 13. And this is part of the study committee on creation of regional stormwater utility districts. Under the powers and duties on page 13, subdivision C2, you wanted to have the committee propose an approach that the state could use for implementing a regional stormwater utility that would allow the utilities to assume liability and responsibility for compliance water quality laws, including how a utility could assume responsibility for A, securing the permitting of properties subject to the 3-acre permit, and B, achieving the phosphorus reduction targets for the 3-acre stormwater permitted properties within the utility district.
Permitting and then achieving the phosphorus reduction for targets. I think that captures it.
Okay. Then you can go to the next page, page 14, line 5, you're in subdivision C3B, and this is regarding the utilities directive to review and recommend cost-effective and equitable approaches for regional level revenue raising and distribution of project funding. You want them to recommend whether and how to authorize a regional stormwater utility to assess fees or charges to all landowners. All was the new word, and then there was a new comma added after residents. And moving on down that page, still in subsection C, this is subdivision C3D. They are going to recommend whether and how stormwater utility can allocate resources and effectively and equitably achieve pollutant reduction measures that are not fully achieved by regulated sites. And those are the changes.
Okay. B.
Actually, there was a change in section 7. No, that change was not made. And that's it.
B that you just read. Sweet. Yes, I think that's good. Do members have questions on these changes? Representative Austin?
Thank you. On page 14, line 16, can you just help me understand not fully achieved by regulated sites?
Sure. When the PMDL was calculated, the load reduction necessary was allocated to different sectors. And the large one, generally the largest sector that they're looking to get load reduction from is from the regulated sites, farming, impervious surface on developed properties, wastewater treatment. things of that nature. That's where they're trying, those are all regulated. And so, how to cost effectively and equitably achieve those when they are not fully achieved by the regulator, how to get to that load when you can't get to it through the regulated sites.
That makes sense, Representative Austin?
So there are a lot of projects out there. Stream bank stabilization is a good example. There's no regulatory program to stabilize your stream bank or to reduce erosion on your stream banks, but it's a significant contributor of phosphorus. So, but nobody's required to do that. If a clean water service provider and potentially these utilities in the future could go find projects like that to reduce erosion, reduce phosphorus from that non-regulated site.
I think an easy way to think about this whole thing is it's a budget, and it's got to add up to the total number of phosphorus units that we need to reduce by. And reminding this group that farming is accountable for 40% of the phosphorus, but we've already asked them for 60%. So we went for low-hanging fruit to begin with, right? And then we know our wastewater treatment facilities, they could do more, but the cost benefit on that is even more than addressing the impervious. So we brought in the impervious as a regulated sector. So like that's like a frame for it, but it needs to add up to that number, total maximum daily load, just like a budget for your household. You got $1,000 a month to spend, how are you going to spend it? So we're trying to meet those goals that way.
I see. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Further questions on this section? Okay, and then you mentioned there's one more.
No, there isn't actually.
Okay. I know that Representative North would like to revisit the issue that he brought up yesterday, at the end of the day.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sheldon. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. After our brief discussion yesterday about the sunsetting of the property transfer tax collection and making Representative Sakowicz and I had a little further discussion and realized that it actually, the sunset actually would reduce the property transfer taxes on the sale of properties, and so that it would actually return, or not return, but return back to a lower value at the sunset period, and that might be a beneficial thing that we could consider doing, especially given that we're hoping, at least at some point in the future, to have these utilities that have additional ways of raising funds by grants and lots of different ways, not just through that one mechanism. And so I think it would be good to keep that on the horizon, that sunsetting date on the horizon. And I don't mind pushing it out until we're reasonably confident we could have these utilities up and running. But I think we should keep it on the table rather than just repealing it so that it's not even in front of the legislators anymore.
Do you have what was the original? We've extended the sunset one other time already, haven't we? So
Yes.
With that experience in mind, I would suggest that we go a little longer than what we've done in the past. So have we done 3 years in the past?
I can't remember how long it was extended. It was extended, I think, from 2020 to 2027. What was that? 2019 to 2027.
Right now it's at 2027.
Yeah.
Oh, right now it is at 2027. Yeah, which clearly is too short. I mean, we've got dates in here already that are on the order of 2038, I think. So
yeah,
pushing that to that time frame kind of makes sense to me, and certainly we should be able to have the utilities up and running by then.
Jared Carpenter.
Jared Carpenter, Relation Plan Committee. If I could make a suggestion, I mean, the advocates are, I would just say, for just terminating the sunset. Committee is entertaining, and I would suggest something like 2036, which is the end of the 20-year period for the TMDL.
Okay.
Sort of as a logical number.
Okay.
And it's what, 8 years out, so it might be a little longer than Representative North was considering, but.
Okay. Do members have thoughts on this?
Can you again explain what that means? I know it goes to the Clean Water Fund.
So there's a surcharge that we created on the property transfer tax that's going into the Clean Water Fund. And we have put kind of automatic sunsets on that, like we do in legislation kind of all the time on stuff. And we were considering just getting rid of the sunset because we've eliminated it twice. But you know, it doesn't hurt to have the legislature check in on these things periodically, which they likely would do anyway, because it's a source of revenue and we're always looking for funding for all kinds of things. But this is dedicated right now for clean water and we've remained committed to it because of the TMDL. So I think at any rate, this would create a sunset and the 2036 year seems pretty compelling to me. Representative Chafin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the Zoom link for this morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to say that I think that this is a logical and responsible choice, and I would support it, even though yesterday I made a case for extending it indefinitely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Do members, any other thoughts on this? Okay, great. So Michael, we'll reword that so that it extends it to 2036.
I don't know when I'm gonna be able to get you that.
Okay.
Maybe 3 or 4. I'm booked until noon and then I'm booked from 1 until 2:30, and this is more difficult than it seems.
All right. So one thing we could do is, because this has to go to other committees, we can vote it out and then amend it ourselves after, right? Because I mean, we just need to, it has to get moving today to get to the Appropriations Committee and the Ways and Means Committee.
I have to sit down and figure out how to do it. For example, what do you want to do when it sunsets? The existing sunsets it from 0.22 to 0.02, and that 0.02 goes to the housing bond. Is that what you want?
So, actually, this also brings up the point that I made yesterday, which is this goes to the Ways and Means Committee, who's going to have broader understanding of those issues. And we could make a recommendation to them that we, upon further consideration, we're thinking of a 2036 sunset and let them work on it. I'm seeing support from Representative North. I think that seems reasonable. Okay. And then that lets you work with people who are more familiar with the ramifications of it than we might be.
And you had to make policy decisions about what you want to do. I mean, do you want to keep the residual to cover the bond? I don't know if you need that anymore.
Right. So I think we hear you. Does that work for you? For that?
For me.
Okay. All right. Any objections to doing it that way? I am not seeing any. All right. Great. Next up, we have changes to 319. We're not voting this morning. We're going to vote after the floor. Sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
So H319. Hold on. Just trying to figure out what I would have to do to change the effect. So, sunset. Now I have to go back to the committee page. Okay, so you should have draft number 2.1, March 13th date with a 5:30 PM timestamp. Do you want me to just walk through changes?
Yes.
First change is on page 3. This is in the Household Hazardous Waste EPR program. Remember, there had been a proposal to move certain products into the paint care program and consequently been excluded from the Household Hazardous Waste Products program. And that when they were excluded in the previous draft, they were excluded under the new term used for paint in the paint care program. So you're just reverting back to the previous term used in household hazardous waste because you have removed paint changes from this draft, and you did that in yesterday's draft, so that's not a change today.
So would this definition section then just come out of our bill or no?
Now, this is the definition section for household hazardous, right? And you
We refer to this.
well, you could take this entire section out. You could. I can do that if you would like. Actually, what I would do is I would just put, it's a bracket and it says, deleted. It just said deleted, period. So you don't have to go back and redo the structure. It takes like 2 seconds.
Well, I wonder if any of these terms are used later anyway, and we might want them there for people's reference
Oh, those terms are definitely used.
later in our bill.
Yes.
And let's leave it.
Okay. So, do you want me to go through the rest of the household hazardous waste or, all right? So on the next change is on page 29. This relates to the request from A&R regarding how the resilience implementation strategy contemplated by the Climate Super Fund Act last year is going to be issued. On page 28 at the bottom of the page, you'll see the directive in that act on how the agency or what the agency needs to adopt by rule. Page 29, line 6, you see that they are required to adopt the resilience implementation strategy by rule. But they have proposed on the bottom of page 29, line 17, to just submit that to you as a report summarizing A&R's adoption of the resilience implementation strategy. Now, the strategy includes everything that the act last year directed it to include. Nothing's changing there in the substance on page 30, 1 through 5. In addition, there is a pretty vigorous public participation process that you've directed them to do. So rulemaking has a very vigorous public participation, but this has its own as well. And so, for example, on page 31, they need to consult with stakeholders. They need to conduct public engagement in areas and communities that have the most significant exposure to the impacts of climate change. So there is going to be public engagement and opportunity. And then on page 31, line 14 in section 20, the Climate Superfund Act had an implementation section, basically setting the dates by when A&R would have to start rulemaking on the resilience implementation strategy and when they would have to finish. Since you are no longer requiring them to do the strategy by rule, this subsection is struck.
There's other rulemaking in this statute, so the heading of this section is still accurate?
Yes,
Rulemaking, good.
there are 2 other rulemakings required. And you can see those actually, they are on page 29. They have to adopt methodologies using available science and public available data to identify responsible parties and determine their applicable share of covered greenhouse gas emissions. And you probably want to do that by rule because it's going to be something that's ongoing for them to identify those that are responsible parties. And then they have to identify or adopt requirements for registering entities that are responsible parties and issuing notice of cost recovery demands, effectively how they're going to do the administrative application for the.
Do members have questions on these changes or this bill more broadly? Representative Austin?
Yep. I'm sorry, I apologize if I don't know the jurisdiction of this committee totally, but we heard a while back about insurers non-renewing insurance, flood insurance. I don't know if in section C, if that could be looked at or kind of studied
Section C of,
of the strategies.
what page are you on?
29.
So that would be, one.
It lists all the practices.
So could I interject? So what is the concern?
So we heard that some insurance companies now, due to the flooding, are not renewing flood insurance.
So are these for homes outside of the FEMA flood hazard?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right, so
I don't think so.
there's a working group that you created last year in your river corridor floodway bill to examine how the state can adopt basically flood hazard area at the state level, and that's going to drive insurance. They're going to be looking at that issue anyway
Okay.
on that committee, because one of the major reasons you go to a uniform kind of statewide system is to maintain compliance with FEMA and to make getting insurance from them more predictable.
I'm not sure if that, I remember hearing that and I don't remember if it was qualified
Right, I don't.
or not, if it was the whole state or if it was just in flood prone
I remember
areas.
hearing it and just wanting to get more information and substantiate it, but it sounds like this.
And it's gonna be run by Rob Hoffman's group, and he really knows what he's doing.
No, Rob Hoffman's group.
Rob leads the Rivers program. Rob,
Oh, the new Mike Klein,
yes,
right? We
and
should,
Mike Klein.
okay, members have further questions? Representative Morris?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd still like to advocate again for leaving. I know we're not going to, but because we didn't have time to understand it and take testimony on the architectural coatings, et cetera. I'd still like to leave it in the bill. Advocate for that because it would force the Senate to address it. Right now, I know you said you're going to pass that information along to them so that they would address it. If we put it in there, they can take it out if they don't like it. And, but at least would, force the hand. So
What's the term that we deleted? Paint related products?
Yes, well, paint products. Let me look.
And I understand that Rep. Bartholomew put that onto the record that recognizing we don't have time.
I think we all agree. There's, likely merit there but needs more testimony. Work.
Trying to get some assurances that would require them to do that work. Don't have time. It would agree with Representative Christie too.
It was paint related products.
Related products, got it. Great. Further questions for Michael? So I'm not seeing any. Michael, maybe if you have a little time right now to just provide the clean copies of these so we can have them for after the floor. That'd be very helpful. And thank you for your work on this. Good luck with the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Members, just want to remind folks that we're going to vote on these after the floor, and the Representative Bartholomew brought up an important feature on the 3-acre that I just want people to contemplate when they're thinking about it, which is that, well, and actually while you're here for a second,
Sure.
I wanted to ask you the consequences of if we don't do anything with 3-acre. If we don't change the statute now, what happens?
The regulatory requirement is still there. The access to funding is available, but harder to access. And probably not sufficient for the need. And if properties don't get the permit or aren't compliant with the permit by the deadline and the rule, then they would have what's called a Hunter Broadcasting blight on their title. And it doesn't prevent property from being sold, but it can complicate it a little bit. And for example, way back in the day in 2004, 2005, when you didn't have a TMDL for stormwater impaired waters, and there was what was called the interim permitting program, where development had to have a 100% reduction. Development was not achieving that, and the permits were not valid. People had to put money in escrow to cover the cost of potential liability when they sold their property.
Say that one more time. Back when there was 100% requirement?
Yeah, but when first did the operational stormwater permit, the update of it in 2004, after the Hannaford's decision, where any runoff into an impaired water had to be 100% controlled. There was a statute that was created and an interim permitting program that would have required net zero, 100% control. And that was just not possible in some places. And people that didn't have a permit weren't getting permits, and people that were developing couldn't get the permit or didn't develop. And what happened when you sold the property, when you sold your house, the purchaser's attorney would say, hey, you don't have your permit, there's a blight on your title, plus there's a potential liability. You should be paying me for that potential liability. And the seller would say, oh, I don't think there's going to be a liability. And even if there is, you need to, as the purchaser, have to handle some of that. So they would negotiate an amount that would go into an escrow for a certain period of time, so that in case the purchaser became subject to liability, then that escrow would be used to cover a portion of that liability. You would have similar discussions here if there was a residential subdivision subject to the 3-acre. If they hadn't obtained the permit, that would be a Hunter Broadcasting blight on the title. The purchaser's attorney would want to negotiate with the seller about how to handle a portion of that liability. And then there's another issue is title insurance. It doesn't prevent you from getting title insurance, and definitely the people that do title insurance in the state are very familiar with the Hunter Broadcasting issues. Jill Spinelli, Kwong, Andy Michael, Hal's gone, but those people that do it they know how to do it. You might have to pay a little bit more for your title insurance when you have a building. And that's what the consequence of not complying with the permit would be.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Plus A&R enforcement, if they're ever gonna do that. I wouldn't think that that would be politically palatable for them to start issuing fines or putting liens on property, but they have that ability.
Members have questions for Michael. Representative Tagliavia.
Are you familiar with the statement Lee Zeldin put out, Secretary of the EPA?
The statement yesterday
I think it was yesterday, or the
about
day
the
before.
waters of the United States.
No longer will the EPA view the goals of protecting our environment and growing our economy as competing choices. We heard the voices last year of countless Americans struggling to make ends meet. We will and must choose both protecting the environment and growing the economy. The reason I bring that up is there anyone in this administration in contact with the EPA to try to figure out what Representative Bartholomew has? What happens if we do nothing? Because of that statement. We have people struggling to make ends meet. We still want to protect the environment. Why can't we do both? How do we protect our neighbors from bankruptcy while still protecting the environment?
I know EPA has issued that statement, but it has no regulatory effect. What has regulatory effect is TMDL that they issued for Champlain and Magog. And the implementation plan that they agreed to with the state only has regulatory effect as long as EPA continues to agree to allow that to be used to meet the TMDL. If you do nothing, if you repealed 3 acre and did nothing to replace it, you technically would not be meeting the regulatory standard for the TMDL, and advocates or whomever could sue like they did to challenge the 2002 TMDL, and they would say that there is no reasonable assurance that the plan is going to meet the goal. And that is a requirement of the Federal Clean Water Act. The only way that that would change is if EPA adopted rules to change that standard. And frankly, that would be years, because it would take them months to write a draft rule. Any draft attempt to implement that draft rule would be litigated. Any attempt to adopt the final rule would be litigated. Even with a accelerated docket in the DC circuit, you're talking at least 2 years. Maybe more.
Right, further questions or discussion for this morning? Not seeing any. With that, we will adjourn until 10 minutes after the floor, when we will reconvene. So please be here 10 minutes after the floor, and thank you again.